What's going on? What is this about?
This is the moment of a shocking arrest. A cold case cracked after nearly 25 years.
In June 2024, detectives arranged for a traveler to be pulled into a secondary screening room at Dulles International Airport. He drank from a water bottle waiting on the table and left it behind. The DNA on that bottle matched blood found beneath Leslie Jennings Preer's fingernails 23 years earlier. But the result exposed something else. Police had been given this man's name in 2002, yet never interviewed him or asked for DNA. How had someone once welcomed by Leslie's family remained beyond suspicion for so long? For more carefully researched cold cases, where every clue matters, subscribe to Archive Without Answers. Leslie Jennings Preer was 49 years old. She was one of 8 siblings, a wife, and the mother of an only daughter, Lauren. After studying at the University of Florida, Leslie married Carl Preer, known to family and friends as Sandy. The couple eventually settled in Chevy Chase, Maryland, where they had lived since 1982. By 2001, Leslie worked for Specialties Incorporated, an advertising production company in Washington, D.C. On Wednesday, May 2nd, she was expected at work at 10 that morning. When she did not arrive and failed to answer the telephone, her employer, Brett Reedy, began contacting her family. At about 11:35, Brett and Sandy reached the Preer home on Drummond Avenue. What they saw inside immediately made Leslie's absence more than a question of a missed shift. There was blood near the front door, including smears on the walls and dried blood on the floor. A corner table had been knocked over. A blood-stained rug had been moved away from the foyer, and there was a puddle of water nearby. Sandy called through the house and looked for Leslie while Brett contacted 911. The operator told both men to wait outside. Officers were dispatched at approximately 11:47. They found Leslie in the upstairs master bathroom shower stall. She had suffered several injuries to her head, and the later autopsy documented deep bruising and hemorrhaging in her neck consistent with manual strangulation. There were also bruises on her arms and torso. Her death was eventually classified as a homicide caused by multiple blunt force injuries and strangulation. The condition of the house allowed investigators to reconstruct part of the attack. The largest concentration of blood was in the front foyer. Certain injuries to Leslie's head were consistent with contact against the floor and the sharp edge of the baseboard surrounding that area. Investigators concluded that her body had then been carried upstairs and placed in the shower. Someone had also tried to erase what happened. Chemical processing revealed wipe marks and blood that had been cleaned from the foyer, kitchen, sinks, door frames, and back door. Water had been run over Leslie's body, yet the cleanup was incomplete, and what remained would preserve the identity of her attacker long after every interview had stopped producing answers. At first, though, police did not know that they were standing inside a murder scene. Leslie's death was not formally classified as homicide until the autopsy 2 days later. The case was not treated as a full major crime investigation on the first day, and part of an exterior doorframe was not removed for examination until the homicide ruling. Police later maintained that this delay did not compromise the case. Unattended deaths can result from accidents, medical emergencies, or suicide, and officers said the cause was not immediately obvious. Still, the amount of blood, the disturbed foyer, and the movement of Leslie's body leave a fair question about whether the scene should have been treated more urgently from the beginning. There were no clear signs of forced entry. Investigators also found nothing missing that made robbery the obvious explanation. Leslie may have admitted her visitor, or the person may have known another way into the house. Neither possibility could be proven. The first person investigators examined closely was Sandy. A neighbor had seen him leave at approximately 7:25 that morning. She heard him saying goodbye loudly toward the front door and assumed he was speaking to Leslie, although she did not actually see her. Another neighbor, who had been outside nearby with children for much of the morning, reported seeing and hearing nothing unusual. Detectives also learned that Leslie and Sandy's marriage had been strained. When questioned about the previous evening, Sandy described several errands, including visits to multiple stores while looking for a battery charger. Years later, cold case detectives thought the level of detail could have sounded like an attempt to establish an alibi. Then Sandy failed a polygraph examination. That result deepened investigators' suspicions, but a polygraph is not proof that someone is lying. It measures physical reactions under pressure, and Sandy was being questioned shortly after his wife had been killed while police were considering him responsible. The later cold case team acknowledged that those circumstances alone could help explain the result. The physical evidence was far more important. Technicians recovered DNA from an unidentified man beneath Leslie's fingernails. The same male profile appeared in blood beneath a dining room baseboard, near the doorway connecting the kitchen and dining room, and on the inside of the kitchen door leading toward the backyard. This was not simply a trace left during an innocent visit. Leslie appeared to have fought her attacker. The man had bled in several rooms and apparently moved toward the rear exit. When the results came back approximately 2 months after the murder, the DNA did not belong to Sandy. That should have redirected the investigation. Instead, suspicion continued to follow him. Detectives considered whether he might have arranged for someone else to kill Leslie, but no evidence supported that theory. Sandy would die in 2017 without seeing the unidentified blood connected to another person. The male profile was entered into CODIS in September 2001. There was no match. Investigators questioned family members, friends, and co-workers. Men considered relevant to Leslie's life were asked for samples and eliminated. Police also examined people associated with burglaries, home invasions, and violent offenses in the area. No viable suspect emerged. Before the first overlooked name enters the file, tell me where you're watching from and what the weather is like there. Then, in January 2002, a former neighbor called police with a name. The tip was not a confession, eyewitness account, or piece of physical evidence. The caller only thought a young man who had once been close to Leslie's family might somehow be connected to the murder. The tipster mentioned police visits to his former residence involving noise and nuisance complaints, along with underage drinking and drug activity. The young man and his mother had also moved from the neighborhood several months after Leslie's death. The information was vague, and moving away did not establish guilt. Still, police recorded the tip, interviewed the caller, and gathered incident reports and criminal history information associated with the name. Lauren also recalled including this person when investigators asked her for a list of close family associates. Despite that, he was never interviewed. He was never asked where he had been on May 2nd. Most importantly, he was never asked to provide the DNA sample that could have either eliminated him or changed the investigation. For the next 2 decades, the blood remained unidentified. CODIS can only produce a match when a sufficiently comparable profile is already in the system. The unknown man had apparently never been required to submit DNA that qualified for entry. Investigators possessed his genetic signature, but no way to attach a name to it. In 2022, detectives Tara Augustin and Alison Dupuis took another look at the case. Rather than beginning with the suspicions of earlier investigators, they returned to the physical evidence. They obtained judicial authorization to use forensic genetic genealogy, a process that could search for relatives of the unidentified man rather than waiting for the man himself to appear in CODIS. Blood from the original scene was sent to Othram, a specialist laboratory in Texas. Scientists developed a more comprehensive genetic profile, and investigators used matches from a database that permitted law enforcement searches. The result was not a suspect's name. It was a collection of distant relatives and incomplete family lines. For approximately a year and a half, detectives worked through weak matches, public records, and family trees that seemed to lead nowhere. The most useful connection eventually pointed to 2 women in Romania. Neither woman was suspected of anything. Their shared DNA simply indicated that the unknown man belonged somewhere within their extended family. Investigators traced that family across generations and into the United States. One surname began appearing among the American branches. It was unusual enough to feel familiar. Detective Augustin searched the old case records again. On June 4, 2024, she found the tip recorded 22 years earlier. The surname in the family tree was the same surname in that report. The man was Eugene Theodore Gligor. Gligor had not been a stranger to Leslie. He was Lauren's former boyfriend. Lauren and Eugene began dating as teenagers and were together for approximately 5 years. Their families lived near one another, and he spent time inside the Preer home. He joined family holidays, ate meals with Leslie and Sandy, and became someone they knew well enough to welcome into their lives. Lauren said Leslie had always spoken fondly of him. The relationship ended by approximately 1999, years before the murder. Lauren said she and Eugene then went about 3 years without speaking. She never remembered him behaving violently toward her and did not consider him capable of killing her mother. After Leslie's funeral, Lauren happened to encounter him at a Bethesda bar or restaurant. She told him what had happened, and he offered his condolences. During the years that followed, they crossed paths only occasionally at events involving mutual friends. Their final one-on-one conversation appears to have occurred after a memorial service in 2019. Those encounters are unsettling now, but they should not be exaggerated. Eugene did not remain continuously close to the Preer family for 23 years. What matters is that he had known Leslie, had access to the family's world, and had been named in the investigation. Yet no one had compared his DNA with the blood in the house. Was the 2002 tip too vague? Or should police have asked Gligor for DNA then? Tell me what you think. Genealogy had pointed investigators toward Eugene, but it was only a lead. His relatives' DNA could not prove that he was the man who bled beneath Leslie's fingernails. Detectives needed a direct sample, and they did not want to alert him before obtaining it. They learned that Eugene would return from London through Dulles International Airport on June 9, 2024. Working with customs personnel, detectives arranged for him to be diverted into what appeared to be a routine secondary screening room. Sterile water bottles were waiting on a table. Eugene opened one, drank from it, and left it behind. After he departed, investigators recovered the bottle and sent it for comparison. The DNA matched the male profile from Leslie's fingernails and the blood found throughout her home. The family tree had returned detectives to an old name. The water bottle established the direct connection that investigators could have tested more than 2 decades earlier. An arrest warrant was issued on June 15th. 3 days later, officers approached Eugene while he was sitting outside his Washington, D.C. apartment. He was arrested and initially charged with first-degree murder. During a recorded interrogation, detectives Augustine and Dupuis asked him about Leslie and confronted him with the DNA. Eugene initially denied involvement. He repeatedly said he did not know or could not remember how his blood could have been inside the house. The interrogation did not produce a confession. It also created a separate legal problem. Eugene repeatedly asked for a lawyer. Although detectives acknowledged that questioning should stop, parts of the conversation continued, sometimes after their prompting and sometimes because Eugene continued speaking. Judge David Leese later ruled that much of the recording could not have been used at trial. The airport operation faced its own challenge. The defense argued that staging a customs screening for an unrelated homicide investigation amounted to an unreasonable search. Because Eugene accepted a plea before the issue could be argued fully, a judge never decided whether that operation was constitutional. Instead, on May 7, 2025, Eugene pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The original first-degree charge would have required prosecutors to prove premeditation. State's Attorney John McCarthy said the available evidence did not clearly establish that Eugene had planned to kill Leslie before entering the house. By accepting the plea, prosecutors secured a murder conviction while avoiding the uncertainty of a trial and the unresolved challenge to the airport DNA. The plea established who killed Leslie. It did not explain why. At sentencing, Eugene claimed that he had consumed alcohol and cocaine before the murder and suffered memory blackouts. He said he vaguely remembered leaving the Preer home but could not explain why he had gone there or provide a complete account of the attack. His lawyers described the killing as an aberration and requested a 10-year sentence. Prosecutors rejected the idea that this was simply a crime without a motive. They argued that Eugene was unwilling to disclose it, pointing to the prolonged assault, the movement of Leslie's body, and the extensive effort to clean the scene as purposeful actions. On August 28, 2025, Judge Leese imposed a 30-year sentence, with all but 22 years suspended. Eugene must also serve 5 years of supervised probation after his release, receive mental health treatment, and have no contact with Leslie's family. He later asked the court to reconsider that sentence. The accessible public record does not establish that the request has changed the punishment. The conviction finally removed the suspicion that had followed Sandy until his death. It gave Lauren the identity connected to the blood beneath her mother's fingernails. Yet it could not answer the question that had remained from the beginning. Why would someone Leslie had welcomed into her home return years after his relationship with Lauren ended and kill her? No reliable account explains what brought Eugene to the house, whether Leslie expected him, what happened before the attack, or why he targeted her. His guilty plea resolved the question of responsibility without revealing the motive. That is what makes Leslie's case both solved and incomplete. Technology found the man the original investigation missed. It could not recover the conversation that occurred inside the house, or the reason he says he no longer remembers. Leslie should not remain only the victim at the center of a remarkable DNA investigation. She was a daughter, one of 8 siblings, Sandy's wife and Lauren's mother. After her death, her family established a scholarship in her name, allowing something connected to Leslie to continue helping other people while her case waited for an answer. 23 years after her murder, the blood left inside her home finally spoke clearly enough to identify the person responsible. The tragedy is that investigators may have had the right name much earlier. They simply did not yet recognize what it meant. For more victim-centered cold cases followed carefully, from the first clue to the final unanswered question. Subscribe to Archive Without Answers.